Okay, it's Bill Kennedy. We're here at Camp Kotok 2022, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Brent Donnelly. Brent, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And how many years have you been coming to camp?
So I've been coming here since 2014, and that also includes 2 trips with my kids in between. So I think this is probably about my 10th time coming here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable place.
That's great. So tell us a little bit. You for many years have been at big banks, trading FX and currencies. You've made a life change and a professional change in the last year. Tell us what's going on.
Sure. So I now work for a company called Spectra Markets, which is a smaller company that was built underneath an existing company called Spectra FX Solutions. So it kind of allows me to do my content and be creative in my own little space, but then also be connected to what I would call like real Wall Street. So I'm covering hedge funds and banks and still having the conversations that mostly stimulated a lot of my content and a lot of my writing in the past, but in an environment that's a little bit more open and a little bit more free, to be a little bit more creative, and to also go outside of my standard lane, which has generally been G10 FX. So I can write about crypto, I can write about single name stocks, I can write about the Fed more. So it's given me a lot more latitude to kind of expand my reach, I guess, or my like intellectual world has become bigger.
And that intellectual capital you're creating, you obviously have a very wide following on Twitter. You're publishing as well? You have the newsletter?
Yeah, so AMFX is a product that it's my global macro daily that I've been writing since 2004. And in the past, it always went to the clients of the banks that I worked at. And so now I'm able to sell it to the world, which also opens up one of the great kind of flywheel aspects of my sending out my writing every day is that the feedback that I get is really useful because it stimulates like new ideas. It gives me the alternative hypothesis to my hypothesis because people will disagree with me, and then I can use that to kind of fine tune my thoughts. And so by widening the scope of who I talk to or who I send my stuff to, I've also found I think I can make a better product now because I'm talking to a wider range, a bigger universe of people. So I write a daily, which is global macro, and then a weekly, which is very crypto-centric.
Great. So one of the things we're exploring at Camp Kotok this year, there are several globally interdependent themes. Currency goes right through the middle of all of those, no doubt. So talk to us a little bit about your view on the dollar. A lot of discussion here at Camp Kotok about the sanctity of the dollar system, and the dollar is a global reserve currency. What's your take? Where do you see the dollar going long term?
So it's really interesting because I think there's this dominant narrative of the end of dollar dominance. It's a very attractive theme. Honestly, if you look back in history, that's been a theme since 1968, probably. Bretton Woods, the gold standard. Essentially, every step that's happened in the history of the dollar since the 60s has appeared to be bad for the dollar. But ironically, the dollar has got stronger and stronger. And so this idea of the end of dollar dominance, which Ray Dalio has written very interesting pieces about, is just this thing that, okay, maybe it will happen one day, but it's certainly not happening now. In fact, the dollar has never been stronger. And so, for example, the SWIFT action that was taken against Russia was viewed as very dollar negative because the weaponization of the dollar could mean that non-friendly states like China or non-allied states would try to get away from the dollar system, but it hasn't worked out like that at all. In fact, and also the emergence of the crypto ecosystem, which is extremely dollar-centric. The stable coins that dominate are all dollar-based. So you have this $1 trillion new financial system that's all anchored on the US dollar. So all these things that appear to be negative for the dollar just keep actually adding to its relevance and its strength.
And we've seen that this year, obviously, the dominant currency.
And if you look back to, say, 1995 or something like that, there's so few regimes where the dollar weakens. So essentially the regime where the dollar weakens is synchronized global growth. And any other regime other than that is good for the dollar. So US is doing better than the rest of the world, dollar goes up. The US recession, dollar goes up because it's a safe haven. So generally people call that the dollar smile, which is over here is dollar outperformance on US outperformance, and over here is dollar outperformance on recession or flight to quality. And the amount of time we've spent in the middle of that has been pretty minimal. And it's almost like everything has to be perfect for the dollar to go down. And the default is just that the dollar is always in demand, especially in emerging markets, but then even against the euro or any of its competitors like the yuan, the euro, or Canadian dollar, or any other one you want to pick.
So one of our big topics is deglobalization and what happens as we see manufacturing potentially come back to the United States or areas outside of China. How's deglobalization going to impact currency markets?
Sure. So I'm a little bit less in that camp that the deglobalization story is going to happen rapidly. I think it's more of a structural thing that's going to happen over many years or decades. It's very expensive to reshore. So what I envision happening is more like a move away from China, more towards Vietnam, towards Mexico, other low-cost areas. And so the currency impact is really not as significant as people would think, because it's not this pure, relocalizing production. It's more of like this 20-year story of finding different, safer places to do your production. And the idea of all the production just coming back to the US, to me, just doesn't seem realistic, because it's just too expensive for a lot of there's just a lot of inertia. So even if you look at, say, Apple, for example, they have so much invested in China, it's very difficult for them to just say, okay, well, let's just make everything in California. So I think it's like an interesting theme, but I think it's, to me, it's overstated, and it's going to be very, very slow and very gradual, to the point where you barely see it in the dollar.
Okay. So a lot of conversation about crypto. I know you've been doing some pretty interesting research, technical analysis and research on the crypto markets. What's your take? I mean, where are we in the world of crypto? How do you see this unfolding in the next 2 or 3 years?
So it's really interesting with crypto. Basically, you have a lot of haters and a lot of maximalist, kind of super optimistic people. And what I feel like my point of view, or my lane, is being a little bit more agnostic. So structurally, I believe in most of like the underlying stories of the technology and the sort of flight from fiat, as MMT and like reckless fiscal and monetary policy kind of is probably the dominant structural theme for the next 20 years. But then I think the piece that people have missed is that there's a very cyclical aspect to it as well. So when the Fed's hiking and real rates are going from -1 to plus 50 basis points, that's not a good time to own crypto, simply because you are owning it as a fiat debasement story, and there is no fiat debasement story right now, because fiscal policy is tightening and monetary policy is tightening. So I think it's important to separate the cyclical and the structural. And so I'm bullish structurally, but I think there'll actually be better entry points for crypto, simply because I think the Fed will be tighter, we have cuts priced in for March, April 2023. And given the inertia of inflation and OER and CPI, like the rent component of CPI, I don't think the Fed will be doing anything dovish for a long time. And so I'm kind of more still cyclically bearish crypto, although in the long run, I think it's like going to be an outstanding part of portfolios in the long run.
Terrific. Brent Donnelly, thank you very much.
Sure.
Welcome back to Camp Kotok,
right.
and thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right.